Hello everyone, welcome to Petrichor on the Rocks. I'm Mason. I recently noticed an increase in interest in supernatural topics, angels and demons, and there's a good reason for this. People are starting to wake up. They're starting to notice, as our societies decline, fall into stagnation, that there are forces greater than us controlling these things, that what we allow into us participates in the direction that our macro groups and social trends move. Because of this, the awakening, the opening of the third eye, if you will, of a lot of people, they've started to want to know, how do they conceptualize and categorize things like angels and demons? How do you recognize one when you see one, and what is their nature? How do you interact with them on the day-to-day? So I thought I'd make a video to go over exactly how these things work. Let's get started. There's a lot of confusion about what demons and angels really are, but their nature and place in reality isn't too hard to grasp. The key to understanding them is the concept of mixed will. Mixed will is just as it sounds. It's the place where two wills meet, and neither will fully expresses itself into reality. God created the world. Had he remained the only being in that world, then his will would fully permeate all things. Nothing would exist that was not his will fully expressed, and his will would be all there was. But what if he created a man, a real true person with a will of his own? Notice that a sphere of control is created around that man, which allows him to express his will into the world. If that man had kept his will one and the same as the will of God, then there would be no problem. Both wills would be in alignment, and the fullness of both could express in unity without conflict. But if the man's will was not in alignment with God's, then a conflict arises between the two wills. God gifted the man a sphere of real control and a real expression of his will. That means God partially stepped back out of the sphere of control and left it to the man. So when the man expresses his will, then everything within that sphere aligns to his will. But at the edge of that sphere of control, his will would find its limit. This is the place of mixed will, an area of contention between the will of God and the will of man. Notice that the man does not get everything he wants, and his will is only partially fulfilled due to his weakness and inability to force what he wants onto the world around him. But God also doesn't get everything he wants. His will is only left partially fulfilled due to his love for the man, which dictates he hold himself back and allow the man to have the bubble of control as a part of the gift of creation. From the man's point of view, this looks like an evil will limiting him and thus causing him suffering when he can't get all the things he wants. From God's point of view, this looks like the man is seeking after evil things, and so God has to place a limit on him in order to prevent too much sin from manifesting into the world. So at the meeting point, whose will is actually being expressed? It's not the man's will, because he found his limit, and it's not God's will, because God has stepped back and given wiggle room for the will of the man. Instead, the wills mix, and each only partly manage to come into fruition. This mixed will appears to be a third unique will, which has attributes of the other two, but is distinct from either. This is the key to understanding how and why angels and demons act in the world. They are expressions of this mixed will. Beings made up of the very struggle between man's sin and God's perfect plan. This is where angels and demons exist. This place that is a mixture of where God's will is not fully expressed, nor is the will of man, is the place of spiritual conflict and war. This is the heavens above, a contested place. To the man, it looks as though he tried to seek after his own desire and simply negotiated with the world to get what he wanted. It wasn't clear exactly what he was negotiating with, but he could see good progress towards what he desired that these deals were getting him, only to learn that eventually he would run into the limits of reality, and upon finding these limits, he would find suffering. The entity that he was negotiating with would now appear as though it were evil and led him into suffering. It may look like the being tricked him or deceived him, promising him a fulfillment of his desire, but really just leading him to a limit in reality which now causes him suffering. It'll look to him that the whole goal of this demonic entity was to lead him to suffering, a hateful and evil thing to do. Examples are plentiful. Consider alcohol. At first, it holds the promise of good times and good feelings, and so the man drinks. He does enjoy the buzz for quite a while, only to find its limit when the pleasure of the substance finds its limit in his body, and he begins to feel the suffering. In that moment, it feels like a curse has been placed on him. Something tempted him and lured him into the suffering, that a will not of his own took control. It was clearly not the will of the man to enter into that suffering. The demon itself may not have created the limit, but the temptation to seek the pleasure that led to the limit appears to be another will luring and urging him into that pleasure trap and that suffering at the end of it. Though he hates it, it feels as though the bottle won't let go of his hand. After all, there's a reason they call such drinks spirits. The feeling that gets in you isn't your own. It's as though something else has taken hold. He started the drinking, and now it's out of his hands because he can't seem to stop. This is true of all pleasures that a man can set his sights on, each one tugging at him and urging him to seek it. But a wise man knows that it doesn't matter which pleasure he seeks. At the end is the suffering of limitations. He knows that if he chooses to seek any desire in the world above all else, it will eventually find its limits in reality, and all pleasure will turn to suffering. As Romans 6:23 says, the wages of sin is death, and indeed it is at the limits of all pleasure-seeking that the pleasure dies and the world turns to suffering. The end of all deals made with demons leads to the death of that pleasure. Throughout the Bible, animals are used to represent urges within the body that are common to mankind. Clean and unclean animals represent the desires within us that are permissible or not, that do good when followed properly, or do harm when indulged in. Sending the message of certain urges are good, which means they can be offered up to God, and God will be pleased. But other urges are sinful and unfit to be offered to God. Once you feel that animal urge inside, you are tempted to begin to make deals with it, giving that urge your time and attention in exchange for the satisfaction of that urge. You might feel hunger, and if you allow the hunger to be your focus, then you can sacrifice time and energy to that urge in the effort to find food. In this way, you serve your belly above all else. That is why demons make deals and why animal parts are used to represent them. In order to understand this, you need to notice the split between all things in the world, form and function. Form is obvious. It's how something appears to physically exist, and we simply observe it. But function is more complex. It extends through time and forms the patterns that make up a narrative. This is the place in reality that a given thing takes up, not physical space, but space of a role within the larger narrative of our world. By connecting the functions of an animal to similar functions found in human beings, we can then use these animals as a symbolic shorthand for much more complicated functions that people carry and live out. By connecting the functions of an animal to similar functions found in human beings, we can then use those animals as a symbolic shorthand for the much more complicated functions that people carry out and live. Take, for example, a dog. The form of a dog is obvious, but what about the function? A dog has attributes that are on the human level, which we see, and so they form patterns in our mind. We see things like a dog being a selectively loyal threat. It bonds to a certain small group it is trained to protect, and then is hostile to those not in that group. Those it protects love it, and those that it is hostile to hate it. This is a pattern we also see in soldiers and policemen. They're hostile and threatening, but only to select types of people, not in the group that they're meant to protect. They share function, but not form, with dogs. Thus it is common to call a fighting man a dog of war, or a police officer a dog of the state, indicating that the pattern of function for that type of man is the same as the pattern seen in dogs. We still do this all the time in modern-day speech. A pig can be seen to eat gluttonously, and a man can feel the same urge inside of himself when his desires for food get too strong. A serpent can be seen to hide and use the underhanded method of venom to get what it wants in the world. A man can feel the urge to use unscrupulous methods in the shadows to change the world more towards his favor. Every animal is an invocation of urge in a way of life that mimics a human life. That is why demons are often depicted with animal body parts. The body parts are representing the makeup of the urges which that particular demon is using to tempt someone. The animal urge becomes demonic when it's taken too far and is made the goal of one's whole being. Pleasure for the sake of pleasure, which serves nothing higher. A demon of gluttony would have the head of a pig, whereas the demon of sloth might have the attributes of a sloth, while a demon of pride might have feathers of a peacock, whereas the most satanic demons are often represented with the head of a goat, because goats, like the devil himself, will eat everything if you let them. Notice that nearly all demons are shown with two horns on their head. The reason that the dual horns is so common is because it represents the splitting of the mind and a defense upon the head that prevents anything they don't like from entering from above. This symbol caught on because it perfectly displays the nature of a demon, a being who only pretends to serve others to serve itself. Thus it has split allegiances, and a head that is adversarial, made to fight and defend, a being not in line with reality as a whole as it accords with its creator, but one which butts heads with all things. They want a part of your life, a chunk of your time dedicated to them, a piece of your soul. And so anytime you give in to an urge, you're signing a contract with that urge and giving it power over you. And not metaphorically. It literally moves your hands and body towards that goal. That's all demons ever were. Spirits that get inside of you and take over. But demons are not the only spirits in this world. Angels exist in the same spaces. When the will of man conflicts with the will of God, then God backs away and allows the man some freedom. But God does not abandon man. God may be distant, but he sends messages in to try and coax man back into proper living again. The word angel means messenger, and it is through this place of mixed will that angels travel in order to bring messages to us. They bring messages of God's pure will through the places of mixed will in order to reach us and warn us of the outcome of pushing our will to the limits of reality and the suffering we'll find there, serving as reminders that there is more to the world than our limited and short-lived desires. But as the messages emerge out of the place of mixed will, they appear to be a will of their own, just as demons did. After all, the message was not God's will. He would rather that we just align ourselves properly and fully with his will, and thus there would be no need for a messenger at all, because we would already know all we needed. But instead, God must compromise his will to reach us, and so the message he sends through his angels reach us only as half messages and partial instruction. To us this appears to be a war in the heavens, a constant conflict fought over our attention, and the outcome of which is determined by our choice of what to give our attention to. Because we are so focused on our own will, we can only accept part of God's will without it seeming overwhelming and impossible. Not wanting to give us more than we can handle, God must dull his light, and his angels must walk through dark and mixed places in order to reach us. The same places that demons call to us from, offering contracts of pleasure. The path angels and demons tread appears to us like a battlefield, each struggling to hold control in the fight for each of our urges. When you sit down to eat dinner, is your meal in service of good health, to do good works, or is it a plate stacked with pleasure foods that please you now, but lead to the breakdown of your body given time? When you have free time, is it spent trying to find something that will maximize your pleasure, but ultimately just kill time that you don't get back? Or is it spent trying to attune yourself to a higher goal and purpose that will build something good in the future? All of life consists of these little questions, and that's what spiritual warfare always was. Nothing but messages coming at us from reality and urging us one way or another. Notice that demons, like angels, are just messengers but for the temptations and contracts of sin. As 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 says, God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. From this we can see that angels and demons are the same thing, except for that which they serve. Two sides of the same coin. Each virtue has a vice. Each urge can serve either its own pleasure or something higher. They are beings which emerge out of the mixed will, both created by sin. Demons spawning forth from the sin of man to bring about his sin's conclusion of suffering and death, and angels spawning forth to coax man back towards what is good and righteous in order to spare us that pain and ultimate death. And yet neither should exist. There should be no mixed will between the will of man and the will of God, and yet there is. God has lost control of these mixed spaces because he gave up that control to us. Now they war and struggle, all for our sake. But don't let the forms we represent angels and demons with fool you. The nature of these beings is that of spirits, disembodied entities which have no physical form of their own. Their goal is to gain your attention and coax you into their service. The forms and animal features we depict them with are merely a symbolic representation used to convey their nature, but when you enter into their service, you are allowing them into you. This is how demonic possession works. If you begin to follow these spirits, you will find yourself less and less able to resist them. The pain involved with removing that desire entrenched within you becomes so taxing that eventually you lose the power to remove it on your own. The reason so many people struggle to purge themselves of addictive desires and urges for pleasure is because all too often people will simply trade one demon for another. The feeling of control gained by purging the demon of sloth simply leaves a gap into which pride may enter. Some people go their whole lives simply exchanging demons, one for another, over and over again in an endless cycle, not understanding that the only way to purge oneself of demons is to fill that hole with something that cannot be moved by mere novel pleasure. This can only come from purpose not found in one's own will, but rather in the will of something higher. This is how spirits function, needing a body to reside in before they can manifest. In this way, a person is not an angel or a demon, but the actions which come out of them are. So you might be asking, are these real beings? And the answer is yes. Angels and demons are real spirits which can become literally embodied inside of a person and cause very real actions to occur. The best argument for believing in angels and demons as actual beings is simple. If you don't treat demons like they are real beings in the world, then they will get you. If you reduce them to mere psychology or material mechanisms, then you lose respect for them. This is because the human mind deals with persons differently than it deals with objects. Objects can be disrespected in the form of presuming the object will continue to function as it always has. A hammer always stays in its shape. This is exactly why finding an unexpected spirit in an object is so disturbing. If a hammer suddenly lifts into the air and moves towards you, then it is utterly unknown what the motivations of the spirit that moves that hammer has. How terrifying to suddenly discover a real being with its own will in an unexpected place. By presuming a will behind what you observe in the world, you are giving the respect of a dynamic entity. A being with a will is not predictable. It only acts on its own will, but it can change its way of acting in reaction to how you treat it. In this way, you can never relax and ignore that will. You must constantly update your understanding of what that willful being is doing, or else it's going to change and get you the next time. Consider a game of chess. If you beat a person in a game, then is the same strategy going to work a second time? Likely not, because now they are wise to it and will react accordingly. If you just blindly play the same identical strategy again, they will have thought of a counter to it and will defeat you the next time. They changed, but you didn't respect them enough as a person to do the same. It's the same with spirits. If you think you have categorized a spirit, then you're going to relax and allow that spirit to change itself in whatever way it needs to in order to exploit your lowered guard. So you can postulate that demons are mere psychology all you want, but if you act like that's true, then the way in which you interact with the world in a contractual way will eventually run out, leaving you worse off than had you not questioned it at all. And that is exactly what demons want. This is the inherent tricky nature of a demon. Luckily, angels are equipped to counter such tricks. It's important to note that angels have wings, but so do demons. Why? To move up is to move closer to God above, and to move down is to move away from God. Why would demons ever want to use their wings to move towards God? It all has to do with their tricky and deceptive nature. Demons will fly up and reside in the air just like angels in order to coax you higher and towards God if it's for your ultimate fall later. If you are moving towards God and away from your own will, then demons will happily fly up ahead of you and try to cut you off and wait there for you, impersonating angels to try and cause you to stop there. Its upward movement and form appearing to be the actions of an angel, but its goal is to coax you into looking back at how far you've come and encouraging you that you've done enough and deserve to stop there and rest on your laurels. To counter this, angels will happily go lower if doing so helps to stop your falling. This is why people will often not notice the messages of God until they experience some sort of pain or tragedy, which finally allows them to sink down into sin, experience the pain of its limitations, and then look around with eyes able to finally see angels and understand where sin leads. Because of the deceptive nature of demons and how they often take on the form of angels, angels will often take on the form of demons to counter this. Two angels saying contradictory things can confuse a person. So rather than remain in the form of an angel, arguing with a disguised demon, often an angel will take the form of a demon and then agree with the disguised real demon. In doing so, it shows the human that a demon can agree with the angel, and so it makes the angel look like a false angel. A mundane example of this really happening would be like a child who doesn't want to eat their vegetables because they taste gross. Thus, the child is being pulled by a demon of rebellion disguised as an angel of disgust. An angel of disgust protects you from gross things which might harm you, but the child thinks it's avoiding a displeasing taste and thus dodging suffering. In order to counter this, an angel can disguise themselves as a demon, such as a parent warning that if the child doesn't eat their vegetables, then there will be punishment. The coming punishment appears to the child as a demon. After all, it is unpleasant and going to harm the child. Now the angel of disgust is being agreed with by a demon of pain and punishment. Both are on the same side of not eating the vegetables. So this can cause the child to abandon the angel of disgust, which was really a demon, and choose to endure eating the vegetables rather than receive the worst punishment. By threatening the demonic pain of punishment, the angel has successfully turned the child into what is higher and good for it in the long term. By threatening the demonic pain of punishment, the angel and the parent who hosted it has successfully turned the child to what is higher and good for it in the long term. The parent, by keeping his will in line with what is good, has protected the child from a demon's deception. These mundane battles occur constantly all throughout our lives. Though they may seem trivial, to give even a few over to the demons risks the destruction of an entire human life. These subtle spirits that exist in our world are very real and have led countless people into sacrificing their lives for things which will not last and will leave them hollow. Be on guard and learn to recognize these beings as they manifest. It's often said that if you know the true name of a demon, it gives you power over it. This is one and the same thing as bringing the demon into the light. The true name of anything is not a single word, but rather it's that which reveals the true nature as a whole, thus rendering its ability to hide or deceive useless. It's been said that the entirety of the Bible is the true name of God, for the whole of it must be understood in order to glean the nature of God himself. With the power of a true name, you can command demons and force them away, just as Christ did. For once a demon is seen for what it is, it loses all power. and why the most power you can give to demons is to assume they don't really exist and not try to name them at all. Once you begin to see them, you'll notice that they are everywhere, behind every action that anyone has ever taken. Study Scripture and learn how to inoculate yourself against them, and most importantly, never trust anything that gets in the way of you moving towards God. All this being said leads us to one simple piece of advice. Be careful what you trade your soul to. But hey, thank you for joining me here. Hopefully you learned something about how these spirits work, what they really are, and how to spot them. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below, and be safe out there. God bless you.